Now, I don't know about you guys, but I fired off a bow and arrow a couple times before, and I'm not exactly what you would call a perfect shot. I'm not terrible either by any means, but not perfect either. But one of the great things about VR is that it allows for us to experience some very interesting things that we may not be able to experience in everyday life. Bow and arrow being a great example. Not everybody has a bow and arrows. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to set up a very simple bow that you guys can use in your own games. Now, this is part 1 of 2 of a small little tutorial series that I'll be doing. So if you guys don't want to miss out on part 2 of this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below so that way you guys don't miss out on part 2 when it comes out, because that will be very interesting. And while you're down there, be sure to hit the like button too if you enjoy this video. And with that, let's jump right into the video. All right, so here's a quick preview of what this is all going to look like. So as you can see, we have our bow here. I did mention that it's going to be in 2 parts. So this is only covering the bow and making sure the string can be drawn back. I hope you guys can see it, but we do have a single piece of string, or what looks like string at least. This is actually a cylinder. Or to be more correct, 2 cylinders between 2 points on this bow. So if I go and grab this, you can see it snaps straight to my hand. You should still be able to see too that there is still that string there. And if I go and take my left hand, I can attach that, and you can see I can pull it back. I can also rotate it with my hand just like that. So I can just pull it back, orient it either way I want it to. So if I want it to be like straight back just like that, and then just release, and it will snap back to my hand. So that's just kind of how this is going to look. This is how this is going to work. And you can see it works pretty well. I actually do kind of like the way that this string turns out too. I really like the way this looks, because it just looks like 2 pieces of string going between the 2 edges of the bow. I actually don't know what this part of the bow is, and I will accidentally make a mistake about that later on, I think. I think it may be called the staff, but I'm not sure. I probably should have researched that. But anyways, this is what the bow is going to look like. And yeah, you can see our string snaps right back to where it's supposed to be, and then I can just go and let go, and it just kind of hangs there again. So yeah, there is the bow. So let's go and jump into the tutorial. So let's go and get started here by putting together our bow. So before we even begin, I want to start by creating an interface. So I'm going to jump into our content browser and create a new folder here called Interfaces. Having a bit of a problem typing there. There we go, Interfaces. And I'm going to go up here, and in Blueprint, I'm going to create a Blueprint interface. And I'm just going to call this Grab. Now, if you followed any of my previous tutorials where I've done grabbing or anything, a lot of this should be pretty similar at this point. We're going to have 2 functions here, one called grab, our second one's going to be called release. And each of these is going to have a motion controller component input. So let me go ahead and set those up. So motion controller component, and that needs to be an object reference for each. So let me go and grab each of those. Motion controller, just like that. So that's going to be our grab and release interface. We'll be setting this up in the player as well, so that way we can actually use this interface. But for now, we're going to start off with our bow. So once we have our grab and release interface there, now we can work on our bow itself. So I'm going to open up our content browser again, create another new folder. This time I'm going to call it Blueprints. And in here, we're going to create a blueprint class. And this is going to be an actor. I'm going to call this bow. So this is going to be our bow that we're going to be using for this tutorial, as well as our next tutorial when we design the arrow as well. So here in our bow, before we start dropping in components, let's go and jump over here into class settings. And I want to make sure that we implement that grab interface that we had created. So just look up grab, and you should be able to drop that in. And you should also see, if this all worked correctly, you should see the grab and release under interfaces here on the left-hand side. So now let's go ahead and drop in everything that we're going to need here for our bow. So I'm going to get started first off by dropping in a few static meshes. So I don't have a proper bow static mesh or anything like that. So rather than find one or make one beforehand, in order to also try and keep this as simple as possible, I'm going to be putting together 3 static meshes. If you have a static mesh that you would like to use for the bow, you can just leave this as 1, but I'm going to set this up as 3 so we have a very simple bow that we can work with here. So I'm going to set up a pillar here, and I'm going to use the 50 by 500. And I'm going to leave that full size as well. This is going to be a little bit big for a player, but we'll scale it down the scene so that way that is all good to go. And then I'm also going to add in a couple more, so let's go ahead and add in, let's see here, we're going to need a couple more stack meshes. And I'm just going to leave these called like stack mesh 1, stack mesh 2, simply because we're not going to be doing anything with these stack meshes or anything like that. So this is just going to keep things nice and simple. So let's go ahead and drop in a couple more pillars for each of these. Just like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these, bring these up near the top. Let's say right about there. Rotate it forward about 40 degrees. And I'm also going to shorten this length because this is probably going to be way too long for most examples. So I'm going to, I believe it's Y if I recall. Nope, not Y. There we go, Z. So 0.5 on the Z is what we're going to be using there. And then let me go ahead, and this one just needs to be rotated. So this one we're going to just rotate down. I believe about 120 should do. Ooh, there we go. Let's rotate just a little bit more. And again, 0.5 on the Z for that one. So that's going to be our bow right there. So that's roughly what our bow is going to look like. It's not a perfect bow, but this will work great for our example. It's got roughly the shape that we need, and so we'll be able to see how this all looks. I'm actually going to rotate that forward just a little bit more. There we go, just like that. So now let's go and drop in the string and everything that we're going to need there. So to start out, let's go and attach 2 scene components, and I'm going to call this upper bow position, and I'm going to create a second one, and I'm going to call this one lower bow position. Okay, and make sure each of these are attached to your static mesh. You can also see I attached the other 2 as well to our first one. This is just because these are all meant to be one stack mesh to represent our bow, so just keep that in mind. So anyways, our upper bow, I'm going to move this forward, let's say about 200. I'm going to bring this up. Actually, I'll bring it forward just a little bit. Let's say 150. 150, just like that. And I want to set this somewhere up here, roughly where the upper point of our string is going to be for our bow. And I'm going to take our second one. And again, I want to bring this forward 150. It doesn't have to be exact, but you will definitely see it if it's a little bit off. So that's just why I'm bringing it to the same point there. So that's going to be 150, just like that. So now we're ready to drop in our string itself. But before I do that real quick, I just want to mention too, the reason I'm using these scene components is because we do need a couple positions to determine where our string needs to be. But you don't have to use a scene component. If you want to use something like a socket, for example, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm only using this because scene component just seemed a lot quicker to set up. And it also gives us a really good visual as to where our string will be. So just keep that in mind. If you want to use a socket or something like that, you are more than welcome to. So now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach 2 spline mesh components. I want to make sure that these are attached to the root, by the way. So that's why I'm clicking on the root there. And we're going to set 2 spline meshes. One's going to be called lower string. And let me go ahead and create a second one. This one's going to be called upper string, just like that. And for each of these, I want to make sure that these have a line segment cylinder. This is the cylinder we're going to be using. And the reason for this is if we come down here, you can see it's pretty thin. It looks somewhat like a piece of string because it's very thin as well. And it's just a little piece of cylinder. If I slow down my camera, I can show that a little bit better too. So you can see it's just a little cylinder and it looks somewhat like a piece of string. Now we're not going to reposition this right now. However, that is an option if you really wanted to. But what I'm going to do is we're going to set this up so that way it'll actually reposition correctly in the construction script. So that way if we decide to move things around later on, we don't have to worry about having to do a whole bunch of different changes here in the viewport as well. But before we jump into the construction script, I want to grab each of our lower and upper string, as well as the stack mesh that has everything else attached to it. And we're going to reposition this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 180 on the Z. And then what I'm also going to do is I want to bring this down so that way our default scene root is roughly at the center point of our bow here, since this is where we're going to grab at. So what I'm going to do is, I know that this is a 50 by 500 pillar, so I'm going to bring this down by 250 on the Z, just like that. And you may also notice too, I'm leaving the lower string and upper string right here at the root component, or not the root component, at the origin point of our root static mesh here. So just keep that in mind as well. I do have a reason we're doing that, and that's so that way we can reposition this much easier here in a little bit. So let me go and compile and save all that. And now we're all ready to go. So now we're going to jump into the construction script right here. So now let's go ahead and move on to our construction script here. So our construction script is going to basically just reposition our lower and upper strings. That way they're both in the correct positions, and we don't have to do any additional work in the viewport or the event graph. It'll all just be handled, and we can also see how this bow will look in its final stage as well. So here in the construction script, we're going to have quite a bit going on here. Not too much, but definitely a decent amount here. So let's go and start by grabbing each of our upper and lower bow positions. In case you don't remember, these are the scene components that we had set up, and these are the positions that our string is going to go to. I'm going to get the relative location of each. So let's go and grab that. Get relative location. There we go. And now for each of these, we need to find a midpoint between these, so that way we can actually make our string look correct. So what I'm going to do is, starting with our upper bow position here, we're going to first find the distance between these 2 points. So we're going to get a distance vector between each of them, just like that. And then we're also going to find a look at rotation. So we're going to find look at rotation, and we're going to go from our upper bow position to our lower position, and we do need to keep this in mind for later on as well. Here in 1 second. So now we have our positions. What we're going to do is we need to combine these so we can determine how far in what direction we need to go. So this should make a little bit more sense in 1 second. So what I'm going to do is take this distance. I'm going to divide that by 2. Oh, not 1, 2. What this will do is this will give us a halfway distance between each, so we can figure out how far the midpoint is between each of them. I'm going to get the forward vector from our look at rotation. This will give us a usable vector that we can use in order to figure out what direction we need to move in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this relative location, I'm going to add on, and what we're going to add is going to be this float multiplied by this forward vector, and that will give us a midpoint that we can use between these 2 points. And so that way we can actually reposition our string pretty easily as well. So I'm actually going to move this down a little bit as well. So that way, this is a little bit out of the way, because we will need each of our relative locations here in a second as well. So with that, we do need to keep a reference to our midpoint, and this will come in later on when we release our string, so that way we know where to snap our string back to. So what we're going to do is I'm going to promote this to a variable, and not a local variable, by the way. This does need to be a variable so we can use it in the event graph later on. And I'm just going to call this midpoint, since this is going to be the midpoint between where our strings should go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take each of our lower and upper strings, and now we need to set their start and end position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set start and end for our lower string. Actually, that needs to come down a little bit. And we're also going to set the start and end position for our upper string. So we'll start here with the upper string here, since this is going to go first. So for our upper string, we're going to take our upper bow position, relative location. I'm actually going to copy this in order to keep things a little bit simpler as well. And that relative location is going to go into our start position. Our end position is going to be the midpoint. And we're going to do a similar thing over here with our lower string as well. So let me go ahead. I'm going to put this lower so that way we have an easy reference to our midpoint here. So let me go and bring down that execution. Our start position is again going to be our lower bow position's relative location. So let me go and bring this forward. That's going to be our start position. And again, our end position is going to be the midpoint right here. So I don't really know that I have a better way of cleaning that up right now. But that should be plenty to go off of right there. So if we go and compound save this and jump into our viewport, you can actually see our strings have now shot between our upper and lower bow position. And you can actually somewhat see it there. It is a pretty thin piece of string, so you're probably not going to see it perfectly, but you should be able to see it, and that's pretty important too. So, and we can also see too, if we go and click on, for example, our lower string, I don't know how well it'll show up in the video, but you can actually see that up until about this point, we have a nice orange line surrounding our cylinder, and that's what we want. That means that we actually did find the correct midpoint between these two. And same here with our upper, you can see that now we have a position between where our upper bow position scene component is and the midpoint right there. And it does actually seem to meet right there in the middle. So there we go. So now we're all done here with setting up our string, and we now have the string set between 2 points that we want it to be in. Now we're ready to jump into the event graph since we're all done with our construction script. So what I'm going to do is here in our event graph, we're going to go and remove our begin play and actor begin overlap. We won't be using either of those. We will be using the tick, but we'll move on to that last. Before we move on to our tick, we're going to implement our grab and release interfaces. So let's go ahead, just right click and click on implement. And let's go and drag each of these up top since we're going to be dealing with these first. And what we're going to be doing is this is how we're going to determine what hand is tied to the string, what hand is tied to the, I don't know what this is called. I want to say it's called like staff or something. Whatever this solid part of the bow is that we're going to be holding on to with our primary hand. So what we're going to be doing is before we can even move on to our events, we need to create two variables. One is going to be called primary motion controller, and we need to make this a motion controller component, object reference. And we need to create a second one called secondary motion controller. So what these will be is our primary motion controller will hold on to our main part of the bow here. Our secondary will hold on to the string, and it will be able to pull the string back. So what we're going to do is start here in the event grab. In our event grab, we're going to grab our primary motion controller, and we're first going to check to see if it's even valid. If it's not valid, then that means that we don't have a primary motion controller set. It means that we need to set one. So what we're going to do is, if this is not valid, we're going to set our primary motion controller, just like that. And we're going to set it to the motion controller that we get through grab. Now, in addition to this, we also need to attach this and make sure that's at the correct orientation. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to attach this actor to a component, just like that. The parent is going to be this primary motion controller. Our location and rotation are both going to snap to target, and our scale is going to keep world. One more thing that we need to do is we need to set actor, I think it's relative rotation. Yeah, there we go. Set actor relative rotation. And we only need to set Y as -90. Otherwise, it does kind of tilt back a little bit, and it's probably not the best way to grab it. So there we go, just like that. Now, if this is valid, then that means that we need to grab on with our secondary motion controller. So what we're going to do is, first off, we're going to make sure that whatever's initiating the grab is not our primary motion controller, because otherwise we will have issues there. So what I'm going to do is we're going to see if this is not equal to the motion controller that we're getting through our grab interface. Run that through a branch. And then if these two are not equal, meaning that whatever's grabbing is not the primary motion controller, then we're going to set our secondary motion controller to the motion controller that we get through grab. So let me see if I can do this a little bit easier. Just like that. There we go. So that will allow for us to set both our primary and secondary motion controller. Now on a release, this will actually be quite a bit easier. Let me go and move this down. Now, as you can see, we only have 2 hands that can possibly release, so we really only need to account for 2 possible scenarios. So what we're gonna do is we can grab either one. I'm gonna grab our secondary motion controller, just because I think it'll be a little bit more interesting. We deal with our primary motion controller up here. We'll deal with our secondary down here. So anyways, if this motion controller is equal to our secondary motion controller, then what we're going to do is in our branch, we will set our secondary motion controller back to null. Now if it's false, then what we're going to do is we're going to set both motion controllers back to null. So let's go ahead, set our primary motion controller back to null, set our secondary motion controller back to null as well. And last thing we need to do is we also need to detach from actor, just like that. We do need to make sure all these are keep world though, so that way they will keep the same location, rotation, and scale. And that is that. So that is our grab and our release, just like that. So now that we've finished here with our grab and release, now we're ready to finally move on to our event tick. Now here in our event tick is where we're going to be able to draw back our string, so that way we can actually move it. It'll also allow for us to move our bow around, so that way we can actually move it between our 2 hands if we want to. So what we're going to do here is, here in our event tick, we're going to start by checking to see if our secondary motion controller is valid. So what I'm going to do is, I got our secondary motion controller and I'm going to convert that to a validated get. Now, if it's not valid, we'll start with this just because this is going to be a lot easier to deal with. If this is not valid, what we're going to do is we're going to pass this through a do once, and we'll start this off as closed simply because we already have all of this set supposedly. So there's really no need to run it if we have no secondary motion controller right off the bat. So there's that. We will be resetting this, by the way, in the is valid, so don't worry about that. Once this is completed, what we're going to do is we'll start by setting the end point of each of our lower strings. So let me actually go and grab this. So we'll grab our lower string and we'll set end point, and we're only setting the end point. And what we'll actually do is, because we know each of these endpoints meet, we can set it for both. So I'm going to grab our upper string as well, and I can pass both into the target and set both of their end positions at the same time. Our end position, we already have it recorded. That is our midpoint, so we'll just go and pass that into our end position. And that is setting our string back to the correct position. One final thing we need to do is, if we come back up here to grab, we do need to make sure that our rotation is set back to its default relative rotation. So let me go ahead and set that. And the reason for this is, supposedly we've let go of the string with just our secondary hand, and so we need to make sure that our bow snaps back to the correct position. So that is what we do when it is not valid. Now the final step for our bow itself is going to be drawing back the string. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple things going on here. So first we're going to get the world location of each of our motion controller components. And we'll need this for a couple things. So let me go and grab our primary motion controller down here, and we'll get that world location. Just like that. And what we need to do is we need to find the lookout rotation between these 2 points. So what I'm going to do is find lookout rotation. I'm going to go from our secondary motion controller to our primary motion controller, so just keep that in mind. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set actor rotation. This rotation, we're not going to simply pass in the value that we have here. There is one change that we're going to make here. So what I'm going to do is, let me move this forward a little bit more. We're going to make a rotator. There we go, make rotator. And what we're going to do is, I'm just going to split this struct pin because we're not going to be using this for anything else. We'll pass through our Y and our Z to each of their correct positions. Our X, on the other hand, I'm going to get the world rotation for our primary motion controller. Let me go and split that as well. And I'll only get the X roll value and pass that into the X for our make rotator there. And that's going to be our rotation for our bow. What this will do is it'll actually rotate the whole thing, so that way it's facing between the two motion controllers, and it's at least somewhat in the correct rotation relative to them too. So that's how that's going to work. The reason we're setting this primary motion controller as X is because this will actually rotate our left and right tilt, whereas everything else will control if we point it forward or back, like up at the sky, and it'll also take care of if we're like maybe trying to fire off a bow around the corner. Then what we can do is just hold out two hands in front of us and kind of angle that around the corner if we wanted to. Now, the last part that for drawing back our string is going to be actually moving our string to follow our hand. Now, this will change depending on your orientation of your bow or things like that. But what we're going to do here is if we actually jump here into our bow, what we're going to do is our bow only needs to slide back and forth along the x-axis. And in case you don't know how to tell which direction's X, which direction's Y, or anything like that, if you look really closely, you can actually see we have a red line here along this axis, and it actually goes along with our red X here. So that's how we can tell which direction our bow needs to move along, which axis our bow needs to move along. If you're going along like the green axis, for example, you may need to change this around so you're following the Y axis instead. Or if you have it up and down for whatever reason, then you may also need it to go along the Z axis. But this is also where having our points centered somewhat is also a really good thing to do as well. And that's also too why we wanted at least a rough midpoint between these two, between where our string should go. So with that out of the way, what we're going to do is I'm going to set the endpoints for each of our strings. So what I'm going to do is grab each of these, just like that, and we'll set the endpoint. There we go, or end position. And what we're going to do is we need to make this vector because we're not going to be modifying all X, Y, and Z axes the same. So what I'm going to do is bring this down and make a vector. What we're going to do is we're going to take our midpoint, and I'm going to split this. Clicked on the wrong one. Split this, and since we're going to be modifying the X, we're going to pass through our Y and our Z only. For our X, what we're going to do is because we can actually find this point by finding the positions between our motion controller locations, this actually simplifies things down quite a bit. So what we're going to do is take our primary and secondary motion controller. Actually, I'm going to create a new copy for this because this is going to get very messy if I don't. So I'm going to go and grab each of these, and I'm going to get the world location. There we go. And I want to get the distance between these 2 points. So this will help determine how far our string should go back. So I'm going to get the distance between these. And one final thing that we need to do is these lower strings are actually moved around in relative space. So if we actually scale down our bow or scale it up, then this may actually end up going back even further or not enough as we need it to. So what we need to do is we actually need to modify this based off the scale of our bow itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get scale, I believe it's get actor scale 3D. Yeah, there it is. Get actor scale 3D. And we really only need one. And the reason for this is because I'm actually going to set this, so I believe I'm going to set to 0.1, 0.1, 0.1 along all X, Y, and Z axes. So I'm just going to take one of these since they're all going to be the same. And I'm going to divide this distance by, in this case, I'm going to use the return value X. And that's going to go into our X value. And that will allow for us to draw back our bow. Now, something I did almost forget here is we do also need to reset this do once. So I did almost forget that. Bring your set in position once we've completed that, and we'll reset our do once. This will tell us that we will need to reset this position. Quite frankly, you don't need to set this as a do once, but I just think it's a little bit better because we don't need to be setting its position every single tick if we don't have a secondary motion controller. So that is our bow set up. So I'm going to go ahead, before we drop into the scene, we need to make a modification to our VRPawn, so that way we can actually use that grab and release interface. So what I'm going to do is open up our VRPawn, just like that. And right over here in our VRPawn, I'm going to take our grab left and our grab right. Now again, I believe I said this at the beginning, but if you followed any of my previous tutorials, a lot of this should be pretty similar to what I've done in previous tutorials. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move that down, is I'm going to grab each of our grab left and our grab right. And for each of these, we'll start with our grab left. We're going to sphere overlap actors, just like that, and this could be unpressed. We're going to get a sphere position around our motion controller left, and we actually need to get that world location. That's going to go into our sphere position. Sphere radius can be whatever you want. I'm going to set it to 20. This is just how far out you want to be able to detect actors in the radius. Object types. This was something I did almost forget about. So if we go and open up our bow again, we need to see our stack meshes to see what they are. So if we go and click down on these, you can see that they're all set to world dynamic. And that's across all of our static meshes. These are going to be the main things that we're really concerned about here. So for our object type, we're going to make an array, and that's going to be world dynamic, just like that. Using these out actors, we're going to run a for each loop with a break. The break is for simplicity's sake. What we're going to do is, if any of our actors does implement the interface grab, then what we'll do is, well, let's first grab our branch here. So if it doesn't implement interface grab, then that means that we can grab it, and we do want to grab it. So I'm going to take this array element and promote this to a variable. Let me go and feed this around underneath as well. There we go. And I'll call this grab left actor, just like that. And we'll need to make sure that it gets the grab message, just like that. And we do need to pass through our motion controller left as well. So I'm going to move that there. And the last thing we need to do is take our grab, pass that back to our break. And that is all that we need to do for our pressed. On our released, it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to just grab our grab left actor. We're going to first check to see if it is valid. And then if it is, we're going to release. That's going to be the message again, by the way. And our motion controller left needs to be passed in as well. And we'll also set our grab left actor back to null. So that is our grab setup there. So I'm going to go and copy all this and just bring this down here for our grab right. We will need to, of course, change some of these references so that way they'll work for our right hand, not our left. So let's change this to motion controller right. If we move forward a little bit more, we don't need a grab left actor. We want to make sure that this is a different actor. So we're going to promote this to a new variable. And I'm just going to call this grab right actor. Grab right actor. Drop that in there and run that grab message. This, of course, needs to be changed to our motion controller right as well. And now down here for released, we're not dealing with our grab left actor or our motion controller left at all. So let me go and remove those. We'll get our grab right actor, and I'm just going to convert that to validate get. And pass through our motion controller right. That's going to be unreleased. And finally, we just need to set our grab right actor to null. And that is our VRPawn all set up. So now our bow and our player are all set up. So what I'm going to do is, here in our scene, we will set our bow in. As you can see, as I had said, this is way, way too big. So what I'm going to do is just scale this down a little bit. And in case you guys don't know, this lock will actually let you scale across all axes evenly. So that'll just kind of help simplify on time if you are really in need of it. With that, that finishes off part 1 of 2 of these videos. In part 2, I'll show you guys how to actually fire off an arrow so your bow is actually capable of doing something. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.